In this nugget, we configure cluster storage and networking. Those are our only two objectives, and that's an important part of configuring a cluster. Here we're not even going to configure the cluster quite yet because you have to have the storage and networking set up in advance. So once we conclude with this nugget, in our next nugget we'll actually set up the cluster. Now before we get started here and get too far along, I want to point out some background and what it is that we're working with. Works. Here I have node 1, here I have node 2, and we're trying to create a cluster. Let's say it's a file server cluster. Okay, file share. That's one of the roles that you can have for clustering. Now, what I need to have is a place to put the files on, right? I don't have anything yet. So I have a hard drive here, and this could be anything. This could be SAN, this could be, what else is there? Fiber channel is common. And then in my case, I'm going to use iSCSI because it's easy to configure, and it's commonly used also in small offices, branch offices, things like that. Same time. It's just not done, people. It's against nature. It should never be done. It's illegal in 19 states. Just kidding. So anyway, what happens here is there's an owner. So right now, the cluster of the file share role, the owner could be node 1, and if it's the owner, it's going to connect to the storage. If something happens here and it fails, you know, the power supplies burn out or something like that, then immediately node 2 will connect. It will take over the storage, and again, I'm going to be using iSCSI for that. So to spin this thing up, let's take a look at file and storage services and see what we've got going on here. What we'll do here is branding. This is CBT nuggets after all, so I'll call this nugget pool. All right, and then we're going to work with this storage space. I'm going to select the group of available disks, also known as the primordial pool, that I want to use. In other words, I'm selecting what appeared right here. Okay, so I'm selecting that, and I'm clicking on Next, and I'm specifying which disk I want to use. I'm just going to use this 4 terabyte disk, but you can pick more than one if you want to, and then you can also make them hot spares or manually configured, something like that. I'm just going to work with the one, though. Click on Next. And then that's pretty much it. I click on Create, and from that point, once it does that, it will totally own all 4 terabytes. And then if I want to carve it up into smaller pieces, I can go down here to create a virtual disk, which I'll need to do anyway, if I want to use all of it or just parts of it, whatever. So then I'll click on Next here. I've got only the one pool to work with, but if I've got more than one, I can pick a different one. And I'll just give this a virtual disk name. How about, I don't know, Nugget VD? Some tells me I could word that better. But anyway, we'll just work with that for the time being, and then we'll click on Next. Then I can specify what kind of disk I want it to be. I'm just going to create a simple disk, but obviously there's mirrored and parity as well. You've got to watch out for that, because in other kinds of storage, which we'll talk about later in this series regarding clustering, some of them cannot have an underlying RAID configuration. But we can work with this as a fixed disk or a thin provision disk. The thin provision obviously will just use up space as necessary up to a preset limit. A fixed will pre-allocate all the space. I'm going to click on fixed for the time being. And let's just give this a size of, how about 100 gigabytes? I could choose maximum size, which would be all 4 terabytes. But I'm going to use 100 gigabytes, and then we'll click on Create. And then that'll take a little while, and when it's done, we'll resume recording. And now it's done. So let's go ahead and close that up. And what will happen here is it'll immediately start the new volume wizard. Now the new volume wizard will allow me to create a volume that we have down here. Okay, I'm going to click on Next. And again, we're working with DC Nugget 1 that we're provisioning this to. And there's our Nugget VD that we're going to carve this out of. I could pick something else. you'll be able to see the storage over here on the iSCSI target. So I just want you to know that I'm going to have to ping pong back and forth a little bit between these two. I don't have to do it that way. It's just that, especially if you're doing this for the first time, it's probably going to give you a more reliable result. So with that said, we'll click on this link here to get that started, and before long we'll have to hit pause. So here we'll just create an iSCSI virtual disk using that wizard. And it launches the wizard, kind of off screen. Let me drag it back. I'm selecting DC Nugget 01 as the server that I'm accessing the volume from, and it's going to be a 40 gigabyte disk, or 39.9. And then we'll click on next, and I'll just call this iSCSI iSCSI underscore VD. This is where we hit the pause button. Okay, and you can see that's going to be necessary here because of the verbiage there. Specify the iSCSI initiators that will access this iSCSI virtual disk. I don't have any yet. I haven't configured any. So here's where I'm going to hit pause. Okay, pause right here, and then I'm going to leave that dialog box open and go over to one of my other cluster clients here, my potential nodes that we're going to have once we get to creating a cluster. So here's cluster 01, but I'm not interested in any of that stuff. I want to go over here to iSCSI initiator, and then we'll go to discovery. And here I'll just click on discover portal and enter. Once again, time to hit the pause button on this dialog box. We're not really ready to come back to anything here. We'll leave it open, though, and come back to it in a moment. And by the way, when you open this up for the first time, the iSCSI initiator there, you may see a prompt that you need to start a service. So of course, you'll go ahead and click yes to that. Now let's go back over here to our wizard, previous wizard, over on DC Nugget 01, where again, we had pushed pause earlier. Now we're ready to push the play button here. Okay, we're ready to continue on. That looks like a little sailboat or something. I don't know what that is supposed to be, but anyway, it's supposed to be the play button. And now I'm ready to click on add. Now offline here, I went ahead and started the iSCSI initiator on cluster 02 and cluster 03. I didn't want to have to take you through all of that laborious task over there. There it is. We're not quite ready with it though because it says inactive, right? So we need to connect, and then here again, we're not just going to accept the defaults and click OK, although we will add this to a list of favorite targets. We want to click on Advanced, and again, go through this and manually select all of these options. Again, my local IP address here, but this time we have an option for the target portal IP, which is going to be 10.10.11.200, and then OK. And again, we have the opportunity to use chat, but we're not going to use that here. So then once we click through all of that, then we'll see that it indeed appears in favorite targets. Okay, and under volumes and devices, we don't have anything yet until we click on click on Next through this. We'll just leave all the space in there. That'll be fine. I'll give it a drive letter, I guess, of E here if we want. And then I'm just going to give it a volume name. I don't really know what I'm going to call it. I'll just call this cluster data, I guess. Maybe I'll change it later. I don't know. We'll just give it something. That's all that matters, is that we're going to make this available to the cluster at a future point in time. Again, we're not configuring the cluster here today. We're just going to get everything set up and get our storage set up so that we can have it available for the cluster when we're ready to create it. Now, having switched over here to cluster 02, let's take a look at disk management over here and see what it looks like. Remember, on cluster 01, that first computer that's going to be a node, it has access to that volume as if it's just local storage, and that's supposed to be that way. Here, however, it just says offline and unallocated. Don't touch this. Okay, if you know you're going to do clustering, just leave this alone, because right now we don't have any way of accessing it. There's no clustering layer there in order to make that available, and it's not going to be available anyway until one of the nodes fails over or until you transfer the role to that other node. All right, let's take a look here at how networking is configured for our cluster. The first network we're going to have will be our production network. Okay, I'll just draw lines indicating a network here, and connected to that is my clients. Okay, it could be other servers, could be desktop machines, whatever, but they're accessing the resources on whichever node is the active clicked and chose rename to make them very easy to identify. In this nugget, we did the precursors to setting up a cluster. We have to have storage and networking properly configured first. Once that's been done, we'll be able to actually set up the cluster, which you'll see in the next nugget. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.